A poor girl pleaded. "Please don't take my home," the rich rancher said. "Then you must be my wife." The snow had fallen for 3 days straight, a slow white hush that swallowed the valley whole. Every fence post was buried to the neck, and the wind carried the thin cry of the ravens circling above the ridge. Down in that hollow stood a crooked cabin, its roof sagging under the weight of winter. A faint thread of smoke rose from its chimney, more hope than heat. Inside, a young woman kept the fire alive with the stubborn rhythm of survival. Clara Mayfield's hands were cracked and raw from splitting logs. Her father had taught her to swing the axe straight and true before the fever took him 2 winters ago. Since then, the land had been her only inheritance. Rocky soil, half-frozen creek, and a stretch of pinewood her father swore would bloom again come spring. She believed him still, though spring felt like a far-off story told to children. The world had gone quiet since he died. Quiet in that particular way grief turned sound into distance. Only the ticking of the kettle and the groan of snow against the walls reminded her that time still moved. That morning, hoofbeats broke the silence. She stepped outside, shawl tight around her shoulders, boots sinking ankle-deep in snow. The rider approached through the curtain of white, a man in a black coat with a leather satchel tied to his saddle. He tipped his hat when he saw her, though the gesture held no kindness. His name was Gideon Hartwell, a man of ledgers and locks, the sort who carried winter in his breath. He spoke without preamble. "Miss Mayfield, I come on behalf of Mr. Elias Thorne." The name fell like a nail on wood. Everyone in the county knew Thorne, the rancher who'd bought half the valley after the drought, a man said to count his coins by candlelight and never once waste a prayer on mercy. Gideon drew a folded paper from his satchel. "This property and the adjoining acres were pledged against debt. Your father's note was never cleared. By law, the estate now belongs to Mr. Thorne." Clara stared at the paper as if words could be burned through sheer will. "My father meant to pay. The crops failed, then his health." "Intentions don't pay interest," he interrupted. His tone was flat, rehearsed. "You've 3 days to vacate." She looked past him toward the ridge, where dark shapes of cattle moved against the snow like restless shadows. Somewhere beyond that ridge lay the great Thorne estate, a mansion of stone and cedar, built high enough to look down on every soul who worked his land. 3 days, she whispered. Gideon gave a curt nod. "The snow won't wait, Miss Mayfield. Nor will Mr. Thorne." When he turned his horse and disappeared into the blur of white, Clara stood alone, the letter trembling in her hand. The ink bled where a snowflake melted on it. She folded it once, then again, until it was small enough to hide in her fist. Inside the cabin, the fire sputtered low. She fed it the last of her pine logs and whispered, "He can't take it. Not all of it." But the room didn't answer. That night she didn't sleep. The wind clawed at the shutters, and each gust carried the sound of her father's hammer, memory echoing through wood and bone. She thought of what little she owned: a worn Bible, her mother's shawl, a pair of gloves mended too many times. None of it could buy her a single acre. But perhaps her voice might. Pride was a thin blanket, and she had worn it long enough. At dawn she wrapped herself in her father's coat and started toward the ridge. The journey was 5 miles uphill, through snow that swallowed the road. The air bit her cheeks raw, yet she walked with purpose, each step cutting into the white like defiance carved from ice. By the time the estate came into view, the light was already fading. The mansion stood against the sky like something carved from the mountain itself, broad, cold, untouched by struggle. She hesitated at the gate, feeling the weight of her boots sink deeper into the drift, then pushed it open. Inside, the hall was warm with firelight and the scent of cedar. She was shown in by a maid whose eyes lingered on the patches in her dress but said nothing. The man she'd come to see sat by the hearth, boots polished, coat dark as a storm. His name carried more silence than sound: Elias Thorne, the rancher whose fortune was built on other men's losses. He did not rise when she entered, only looked up from his glass with the calm of someone who had seen every kind of plea before. She curtsied stiffly, though she had never been taught the proper way. "Mr. Thorne, sir. I've come about the Mayfield cabin. It was my father's home. Now, if there's debt owed, I'll work it off. I'll—" He cut her short with a glance sharp enough to still the air. "Work cannot repay what is gone." His voice was deep, not unkind, but worn with distance. The fire cracked behind him, throwing gold light across his face, an expression carved from restraint. Clara stepped closer, hands trembling. "Please, don't take my home. I'll tend your stables, your fields. Anything you ask." Thorne studied her for a long while. Beneath his gaze she felt every threadbare inch of her dress, every scar on her palms. Yet there was something searching in his look, something beyond the calculation she expected. He set down the glass and spoke softly. "You have nothing to offer me, Miss Mayfield." Her throat tightened. "Then let me offer what I can, my word and my work. My father always said honesty was worth more than gold." That made him pause. The corner of his mouth twitched, almost a smile but not quite. He leaned back in his chair. "Honesty is rare coin indeed," he murmured. "But the world still trades in silver." She swallowed hard, ready to plead again, when he stood and walked to the window. Outside, the snow fell heavier, cloaking the fields in white silence. "You'd live alone up there through winter?" he asked without turning. "I have before. And you'd die there just the same if the storm worsened." She said nothing. He faced her then, and for a heartbeat the firelight caught in his eyes. Tired, searching eyes that betrayed something human beneath the wealth. "You seek mercy," he said at last. "I've little to give. But I do require something." "What is it?" His next words fell slow, deliberate. "A wife." Clara blinked, sure she'd misheard. The room seemed to tilt. "Sir." He crossed to the hearth, lifting his glass again. "My affairs are watched closely. A man in my position is expected to have a household, a name shared, a home tended. I have land, labor, fortune. But no one to keep the gossip from my door. You want to keep your house. I need a wife in name. Marry me, and the land remains yours." Her breath caught in her chest. Sounded absurd, cruel even. "You'd take a beggar to your table." "I'd take an honest soul," he said simply. "The rest matters little to me." The offer hung between them, heavy as the snow piling against the windows. She could hear her heartbeat over the crackle of the fire. This man, cold and unreadable, was offering her salvation disguised as sacrifice. She thought of the cabin, of the little cross on the hill where her father lay, of the promise she'd made to keep his home alive. Pride wavered, but duty held. "If I say yes," she whispered, "it won't be for gold." He inclined his head slightly. "Nor for love." Her eyes lifted to his. "Then for survival." The faintest breath of something, pity or respect, passed between them. He nodded once. "Tomorrow then. The chapel at noon." When she stepped back into the night, the snow had ceased falling. The world lay white and silent, the moon brushing the fields in silver. She walked home through the hush, the echo of his words following her like distant bells. A wife in name. It was not what she'd dreamed of as a girl, but dreams were a luxury she'd long since traded for warmth. At dawn, she dressed in the plain gray gown her mother once wore to church, the fabric thin but clean. The chapel stood behind the estate, small and cold, its steeple half buried in frost. There were no guests, only the pastor, a housemaid as witness, and Elias Thorne waiting at the altar. He looked almost spectral against the white, coat black, hair dusted with snowflakes. The vows were spoken quickly, voices soft as breath. When it was done, he slipped a simple gold band on her finger. His hand was warm, steady, not unkind. Outside, snowflakes drifted like blessings or warnings. She watched him mount his horse, the wind carrying his voice back to her. "You'll have quarters in the east wing. My staff will see to your needs." Then he was gone, a dark figure vanishing into the storm. Clara turned toward the mansion, its windows glimmering faintly through the snow. Inside waited a home not hers, a future bound by name, not affection. Yet beneath the weight of cold and choice, something quiet stirred in her chest, a fragile ember refusing to die. Perhaps, she thought, warmth can begin even in the coldest rooms. She stood at the door and whispered, "If love ever finds its way here, it'll be through kindness, not promise." Then she crossed the threshold, and the door closed softly behind her. The days that followed passed like muted echoes inside the mansion's high stone walls. Clara moved quietly through rooms built for voices grander than hers. The servants watched her with curiosity at first, some pity, some skepticism, but she gave them no cause for gossip. Each morning she woke before dawn, lit the kitchen fires, and took to the small routines that made the silence bearable. Her husband seldom spoke at breakfast. He read reports by the fire, his face pale in the grey light, his thoughts elsewhere. He was a man accustomed to command but not conversation. She did not intrude on his stillness. She had learned long ago that words were not the only way people revealed themselves. One evening she found him in the stables after dark, brushing down a restless stallion. The wind had cut through her shawl on her walk from the house, yet he seemed untouched by the cold, sleeves rolled, movements steady. She hesitated at the door until he said without looking up, "You should not walk out here alone at night. Wolves still roam the ridge." She replied softly, "I've met worse than wolves." The words startled him into looking at her. For a fleeting moment, something like amusement crossed his face. Quick, fragile, gone before she could decide whether it had been real. She helped him refill the trough, her small hands dipping into the icy water without complaint. When their fingers brushed, his eyes flickered, not with warmth but with the startled recognition of human presence he had long forgotten. He began to watch her after that. Not openly, but in the way a man observes something he does not wish to need. He saw her sweep the corridors, mend torn curtains, hum to herself while dusting the bookshelves that hadn't been touched in years. Her voice was soft, tuneless, more habit than melody, yet it filled the empty air with something alive. The house seemed to breathe again. Even the servants moved differently, their steps lighter, as though the presence of this quiet girl somehow reminded them of gentler times. One afternoon, a letter arrived bearing the seal of a neighboring rancher. Thorne read it in silence by the window, his jaw tightening. Clara noticed and asked, "Bad news?" He hesitated before answering. "Only old debts finding their way home." His tone carried the fatigue of a man constantly reminded that power never frees one from burden. She wanted to ask more but sensed the boundary between them like a drawn gun. Instead, she poured him coffee and said, "Then may the burden fall light this time." He looked at her, startled again by the calm in her voice. "You speak as though you've carried heavy things yourself," he said. She smiled faintly. "A home, a grave, and a name. That's enough weight for anyone." It became a quiet rhythm, her small acts of care, his guarded gratitude. When she set out seed for the winter birds, he joined her once, standing awkwardly beside her as finches darted through the pale air. "You feed them even when the snow covers everything?" he asked. "They remember," she said simply. "So should we." That night, he found himself unable to read. The crackle of the fire drew him back to thoughts of her standing among the birds, her breath clouding the air like prayer. He realized he had begun to listen for her footsteps in the hall. Loneliness, once a comfort he'd worn like armor, now pressed differently, like hunger, like longing. But habit and pride are strong masters. He told himself it was pity. He was wrong. Winter deepened. The valley froze into stillness. Then came the storm, thick, blinding snow that erased horizon and path alike. It started at dusk and raged through the night, winds shrieking against the windows. When lightning struck the north barn, the explosion of light and sound tore them both from sleep. Without a word, Thorne pulled on his coat and ran into the storm. Clara followed, boots sinking with each desperate step. Flames climbed the barn walls, wild and golden against the black sky. Sparks leapt like furious angels. Thorne shouted orders to the ranch hands, his voice swallowed by the wind. He moved through smoke and snow like a man born to command disaster. When the roof began to sag, he rushed toward the trapped horses, but the heat drove him back. Clara seized a wet blanket, drenched it in the trough, and ran past him before he could stop her. He caught her wrist, shouting that she'd burn alive, but she tore free, face streaked with soot and snow. Inside the burning stall, she found a foal crying in terror, tangled in broken timber. The smell of scorched hay filled her lungs. She covered the animal's eyes, murmuring softly, and with a strength born of sheer will dragged it toward the open door. Thorne met her halfway, throwing his coat over them both as the roof gave way behind them. They stumbled into the snow, coughing, clutching the trembling creature between them. The barn collapsed in a roar of flame. The snow hissed where embers fell. He caught her shoulders, his voice breaking through the chaos. "You could have died," she coughed, wiping soot from her cheek. "Then I'd have died keeping something worth saving." Her eyes met his, clear, steady, alive. In that instant, the walls around his heart, built stone by stone over years of bitterness, cracked. He pulled her into his arms, and the kiss they shared was not gentle. It was the raw meeting of two souls thawing at once, fire and frost dissolving into something entirely human. When dawn came, the valley lay hushed beneath new snow. Smoke rose from the blackened ruins of the barn, but the light was golden and forgiving. The ranch hands worked in silence, glancing at their master and the woman beside him. No one spoke of what had changed. Some things are better left to the language of glances and small smiles. Later, as the sun reached the ridge, Thorne found Clara by the paddock fence, her hands wrapped around a cup of coffee gone cold. He stood beside her for a while, watching the horses nose through the snow. "I'll rebuild it," he said quietly. "Better than before." She nodded. "You will." He hesitated, then added, "I meant what I said that night, about needing someone. But I see now I mistook what kind." She turned to him, waiting. "I thought I needed a wife to keep up appearances," he continued. "Turns out, I needed a heart to remind me I was still a man." Her eyes softened. "Then you'll have to learn both." The faintest smile touched his mouth. "Will you teach me?" She met his gaze and said, "If you'll let me stay." He reached into his coat pocket and drew out a folded document, the deed to her father's land. "It's yours," he said. "No conditions, no debts." She stared at the paper, unable to speak. "Elias." His name on her lips was gentle, unguarded. "This isn't charity." He shook his head. "No. It's restitution. For the years I mistook silence for strength." She took the deed with trembling fingers and pressed it to her chest. For the first time since her father's death, she felt the world open instead of close. The snow had stopped falling. The air carried the clean scent of thaw. They stood together in that fragile peace, two people who had found shelter not in walls or wealth, but in each other. By evening, the sky blushed rose and gold. The mansion, once cold and echoing, glowed with firelight and laughter from the kitchen. Clara sat by the window, mending a torn sleeve while Elias read aloud from an old book she found in his study. His voice was lower now, warmed by use. Every so often he would glance up, as if to make sure she was still there, and each time she met his eyes, the distance between them shortened a little more. When night settled fully, he closed the book and said softly, "I used to think the snow made the world lonely." She looked toward the window, where flakes drifted lazily past the glass. "Maybe it only waits for someone to see the beauty in it," she answered. He moved closer, his hand finding hers. "Then perhaps it was waiting for you." Outside, the land lay still, the stars bright over the white valley. Inside, the fire whispered against the hearth, and warmth, the honest, quiet kind, spread through every room. For the first time, the mansion felt like a home, and the man who had built it for solitude now shared it with someone who had taught him mercy. Years later, when folks spoke of that storm, they said it was the night the valley changed. The snow melted early that spring, and wildflowers grew where ash had fallen. Some swore they saw light burning in the windows of the Thorne estate long after midnight, soft, steady, like two souls keeping watch over one another. And somewhere in the hush of that land, carried on the wind and the whisper of leaves, a truth remained. Even in the coldest hearts, kindness can take root. And sometimes the truest love does not arrive with summer, but walks out of a storm, wearing the name of a bride in snow.